Porsche is the most successful manufacturer in motorsport history when you count overall race wins. Le Mans, Daytona, the Nurburgring, Sebring, the Targa Florio. They have won everywhere except Formula One. In 1962, Porsche built a Grand Prix car, entered the World Championship, won a race, and then quit. They have never come back. This is the story of the Porsche 804, the car that proved Porsche could win in Formula One right before they decided they did not want to. Number 10. Porsche only entered Formula One because the rules changed to match them. In 1961, the governing body of motorsport did something drastic. They slashed the maximum engine size in Formula One from 2,500 cubic centimeters down to just 1,500 cubic centimeters. Overnight, every team on the grid needed a smaller engine. Ferrari had to build a new one. The British teams scrambled for new power units from Coventry Climax and BRM. It was chaos for everyone except Porsche. Porsche had been racing in Formula 2 with engines right around that 1,500 cubic centimeters of displacement for years. They already had the hardware. They already had the expertise. With one rule change, Porsche suddenly had a Formula One car, whether they intended to or not. Ferry Porsche saw the opportunity and authorized the project, but he was cautious. He sent the cars to races with a strict instruction. If the Porsches were not competitive during practice, the team was to pack up and drive home without excuses or embarrassment. Either they belonged on the grid or they did not. Number 9. The car was designed by the man who would create the Porsche 911. Ferdinand Alexander Porsche, known as Butzi, was a young designer who had just taken over as manager of Porsche's design studios when the 804 project began. The 804 was his first piece of exterior design work ever shown publicly. It was not a road car. It was a Grand Prix racer. Butzi shaped the aluminum bodywork around the flat 8 engine, creating a sleek, low profile with a rectangular cross-section that hugged the mechanical components as tightly as possible. The car weighed just 460 kilograms. That was barely 10 kilograms over the minimum allowed by the regulations. Every gram had been considered. The same eye for proportion and the same instinct for stripping away the unnecessary that Butzi brought to the 804 would show up again just a few years later when he penned the shape of the Type 901, the car the world would come to know as the Porsche 911. Number 8. The engine took over 200 hours to build by hand. The heart of the 804 was the Type 753, a 1,494 cubic centimeters, air-cooled flat 8. It was designed by 2 engineers, Hans Mezger and Hans Mezger, and it was spectacularly complex. The crankcase was cast from magnesium. Each of the 8 cylinders sat in its own separate aluminum barrel with individual finned cooling. 4 Weber carburetors fed the intake. A horizontal cooling fan sat on top of the engine, spinning at nearly crankshaft speed, drawing air across the cylinders. The camshafts were driven by shafts and bevel gears rather than chains or belts. Assembling the whole thing from scratch required at least 100 hours of hand-fitting and adjustment, and could take as many as 220 hours depending on the engine. For comparison, the flat 6 production engine that Porsche would develop for the 911 could be assembled in under 24 man-hours. The first prototype, Type 753, fired up on a test bench in December 1960. It produced around 120 horsepower. The target had been 200 horsepower. Mezger and Honig spent over a year improving it, adjusting valve angles, reshaping combustion chambers, switching to titanium connecting rods. By the time the engine raced for the first time in May 1962, it was making around 177 horsepower at 9,200 RPM. That was still less than the Coventry Climax and BRM58 engines powering the British competition, but it was enough to be competitive, and it was extraordinarily reliable. Number 7. Their very first race was a disaster. The Porsche 804 made its debut at the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort on May the 20th, 1962. Two cars were entered. Dan Gurney, a tall American from Southern California, took one. Swedish driver Joachim Bonnier, called Joe, took the other. Gurney was not some unknown quantity. He had raced for Ferrari in 1959, scoring podiums in only 4 starts. He moved to BRM in 1960, then joined Porsche for 1961. He was tall for a racing driver, which was a problem in a car designed for smaller European drivers. His upper body stuck out above the cockpit and into the airstream, creating drag that the engineering team could do nothing about. By contrast, Jim Clark sat reclined inside the sleek Lotus 25, barely visible from the outside. Gurney was fighting aerodynamics as much as the competition. Gurney qualified 8th and managed to climb as high as 3rd early in the race, but his gearbox began failing and he was forced to retire after 47 of 80 laps. Bonnier fared slightly better in the sense that he at least finished, but he crossed the line in 7th place, behind a privateer named Karel Godin de Beaufort, who was driving an older 4-cylinder Porsche 718. Being beaten by a customer in a hand-me-down car was not exactly the debut Porsche had in mind. Number 6. Dan Gurney nearly won a Grand Prix for Porsche a full year before the 804 even existed. In 1961, Gurney was racing the older Porsche 718 in Formula 1, and at the French Grand Prix at Reims, he was leading the race on the final lap. An Italian driver, Giancarlo Baghetti, was closing in a faster Ferrari 156, looking for a gap to pass on the long straight to the finish line. Gurney could have blocked him. He could have weaved or positioned his car to make the overtake impossible. He refused. Gurney considered blocking at those speeds in open-wheel cars to be dangerous and unsportsmanlike. He held his line. Baghetti slipped past him on the final straight and took the win. It was Baghetti's first ever championship race. And he won it because the man in front of him had a code of honor that would not bend even with victory on the line. Gurney finished second. It was one of 3 second-place finishes he scored that season in the slower Porsche, and it set the stage for what would come in 1962 with the 804. Number 5. The French Grand Prix win came down to one thing: reliability. July 8, 1962, Rouen-les-Essarts. The circuit wound through woodlands south of the city of Rouen, with elevation changes, blind corners, and a road surface that was brutal on suspension and drivetrain components. There were no gravel traps, no runoff areas, nothing between the edge of the tarmac and the trees. Gurney described the circuit before the race. He said it was a much rougher circuit than it looked, and that it was hard on suspension, gear trains, and steering. He qualified 6th, starting on the 3rd row. The BRM cars and the Lotus 25s were faster in a straight line. Nobody expected a Porsche to win. For the first half of the race, nobody would have predicted it either. Graham Hill's BRM led early. Jim Clark's brand new monocoque Lotus 25 was quick. John Surtees was charging in a Lola. Jack Brabham was in the mix. The Porsche was competitive, but Gurney had qualified on the 3rd row and was working his way forward methodically, not trying to match the faster cars on pace, but trusting that the 804 would still be running when they were not. And that is exactly what happened. One by one, they broke. Hill retired, Clark retired, Surtees retired, Brabham retired. The rough circuit surface that Gurney had warned about tore apart suspension components, gearboxes, and engines all around the field. The Porsche 804, with its overbuilt flat 8 and robust space frame chassis, just kept running. It was not elegant. It was not the fastest car out there, but it was the one that refused to break. With 13 laps to go, Gurney found himself in the lead. He opened up a gap of an entire lap over Tony Maggs in a Cooper and crossed the finish line after 2 hours and 7 minutes of racing to give Porsche its first and only Grand Prix victory. Gurney later said that he loved Rouen because it had everything. One of his favourite photographs from his entire career was of Juan Manuel Fangio in a Maserati 250F at Rouen years earlier, demonstrating the art of taking the downhill section after the pits. That gives you an idea of how Gurney thought about racing. He was not just quick, he was a student of the sport. Number 4. 1 week later, Gurney won again in front of 300,000 people at Porsche's home circuit. The Solitude circuit sat near Stuttgart, right in Porsche's backyard. It was not a World Championship event, but for Porsche, it meant everything. 300,000 spectators lined the track. Gurney won again, with Bonnier finishing second. The two silver Porsches crossed the line in first and second, beating Jim Clark's factory Lotus. After the race, the organisers put Gurney and Bonnier on the back of an open convertible to do a victory lap around the circuit. Gurney later described what happened. As they drove, the German fans threw their hats in the air in a continuous wave, like a rolling tide of celebration that kept going for the entire lap. He called it one of the most memorable moments of his racing career. The data on this channel shows that over 80% of you watching right now are not subscribed. That means you are showing up for the content, but the algorithm has no reason to show you the next video. If you have made it this far, you clearly care about this kind of motorsport history. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Number 3. At the German Grand Prix, Dan Gurney drove the last 10 laps holding his battery in place with his left leg. The Nurburgring, August 1962. Gurney had qualified on pole position for the first time in the 8:04, proving the car had genuine speed and not just durability. In terrible Eifel Mountains weather, Gurney led the opening laps. Graham Hill in the BRM fought past him, and then John Surtees joined the battle. 3 cars, nose to tail, in the rain on one of the most dangerous circuits in the world. Then, Gurney's battery came loose inside the cockpit. Rather than pull into the pits and lose everything, he jammed his left leg against the battery to hold it in place and kept driving with courage. For the final 10 laps, he steered, shifted, braked and managed the car through the Nürburgring's 170 corners with one leg pressed against a loose battery. The 3 cars crossed the line, covered by just 4.4 seconds. Gurney finished third. It was arguably the finest drive of his Formula One career, and it proved beyond any doubt that the 8:04 was not just a lucky winner at Rouen. In the right hands, on the right day, this car could fight with the best in the world. Number 2. Ferry Porsche pulled the plug because Formula One was too expensive, and the 911 needed the engineers. After the German Grand Prix, the season wound down with disappointing results at the Italian and United States Grand Prix. Porsche even skipped the final round in South Africa. The team finished 4th in the Constructors' Championship, tied on 18 points with Ferrari. Not bad for a small sports car manufacturer from Stuttgart racing against the established giants. But the numbers did not add up. Assembling a single Type 753 engine required over 200 hours of skilled labour. Porsche had built 4 chassis during the season and raced 3 of them. The engineering complexity and the cost of competing at the highest level of motorsport was draining resources from what Ferry Porsche saw as the company's real future, the Type 901 road car project. The same Hans Mezger, who had spent 2 years developing the Flat 8 engine, was needed to design the production Flat 6 that would power the 911. You cannot do both at the same time when you are a small company in Stuttgart competing against the budgets of Ferrari, BRM, and the British constructors. Ferry Porsche made the reluctant decision to withdraw. The Flat 8 engine would continue in sports car form, enlarged to 2 litres, and eventually winning at the Targa Florio, Sebring, and Daytona. Mezger himself would go on to design the engine for the legendary Porsche 917, the car that finally gave Porsche overall victory at Le Mans in 1970. Every one of those triumphs traces back to the engineering work that began with the 804's Flat 8. But the Formula One cars were put away. Porsche has never returned to Formula One as a constructor. Number 1. 20 years later, Porsche came back to Formula One as an engine supplier and won 3 consecutive world championships. In 1981, McLaren boss Ron Dennis approached Porsche with a proposal. He wanted them to design and build a turbocharged V6 engine for his Formula One team. The project was funded by TAG, Techniques d'Avant-Garde, and the engine carried the TAG name, but it was pure Porsche engineering. And the man who designed it was Hans Mezger, the same engineer who had designed the Flat 8 engine in the 8042 decades earlier. The TAG Porsche Turbo 5.6 debuted in late 1983 and immediately proved competitive. In its first full season in 1984, McLaren won 12 out of 16 races. That is not a typo. 12 out of 16. the championship battle became a private fight between McLaren teammates Niki Lauda and Alain Prost, with both drivers in Porsche-powered cars. Lauda won the 1984 title by half a point, the closest margin in Formula One history. Prost won in 1985 and 1986. In total, the Porsche-designed engine-powered McLaren to 25 Grand Prix victories, 2 Constructors' Championships, and 3 consecutive drivers' titles across 5 seasons of racing. The irony is striking. Porsche left Formula One in 1962 because a flat 8 engine was too complex and too expensive to justify. 20 years later, Mezger designed a turbocharged V6 that was even more complex, producing over 1,000 horsepower in qualifying trim by 1987, and it became one of the most dominant engines the sport has ever seen. So the full picture of Porsche in Formula One is this. They entered as a constructor in 1962, won 1 race, and left because it was too expensive. They came back 20 years later as an engine builder, won 3 championships, and left again. Porsche has proved twice that they can compete at the highest level of single-seater racing. They just keep deciding they would rather do something else. As for Dan Gurney, he went on to win 2 more Grand Prix races for Jack Brabham's team in 1964, and then built his own car, the Eagle, winning the 1967 Belgian Grand Prix at Spa. That made him the only driver in history to score maiden Grand Prix victories for 3 different constructors: Porsche, Brabham, and his own All-American racers. He married a woman he met while working at the Porsche factory, a public relations executive named Evie Butz. The 804 was the beginning of everything for both of them. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing. We will see you in the next one.